Britain faces an almighty challenge. And to get a sense of just how big it is, you've got to start at the top.
Oh, crumbs.
This is the Forth Road Bridge, just north of Edinburgh.
Here you want to hold on.
It looks magnificent, but key parts of it are wearing out. And in the waters of the Forth below me, they're just laying the foundations for a brand new bridge. All over Britain, it's the same story. Much of the civil engineering that holds our country together is no longer up to the job.
You see, Britain needs more than just a lick of paint. It needs some serious work. It won't be easy, it won't be cheap. But if we're ambitious for our future, there's no better time to get on with the job of building it than right now.
So I'm out to discover why infrastructure is suddenly a hot topic. I'll show you how we've rediscovered the knack of pulling off those really big projects. And we'll see what lessons our history can teach us today.
In this series, I'll be lifting the lid on the stunning engineering that's transforming Britain. I'll be finding out what still needs to be done and how on earth we're going to do it.
Tucked away in a narrow corner of West London, in the shadow of the A40, is a remarkable project. It busts a myth that Britain can't pull off epic engineering.
This is one of the most ambitious, most complex, most expensive infrastructure projects you'll find pretty well anywhere. This is just one site of Crossrail, the new east-west railway right across London. Now, to get the measure of it, I've got an appointment with Phyllis, and I'm told she's not to be messed with.
Phyllis is one of Crossrail's 8 vast tunnel boring machines which are about to worm their way under London. She's from Germany, she carries quite a lot of weight, and she costs £10 million. But for that, you get a lot of tunnelling. It's only when you see her teeth that you realise just what she's capable of.
We've arrived at a bit of a moment, actually, because they've got this tunnel boring machine, weighs 1,000 tonnes, 150 metres long, just a few centimetres of clearance above it, and they've got to slowly inch it down towards the point at which it's actually going to dig.
If you thought washing up liquid was just for the kitchen, think again. Phyllis and her colleague Ada are heading beneath Paddington Station, under Hyde Park, below the tightly packed streets of London's West End, and out to Farringdon to the east. It's the big tunnelling drive for what'll be the new fast line across London when it opens in 2018.
You can talk about Crossrail being the biggest construction programme in Europe. It's £14.8 billion. We're digging 50 kilometres of tunnels under London, and if you get on a train at Maidenhead and get off at Shenfields, then that's about 120 kilometres long. So this is as big as they get.
And as I enter the tunnel to see Phyllis in operation, I'm left in no doubt what an extraordinary machine she is.
Boy, you can really feel the temperature has warmed up, even though we're only about 50 metres in. Thank you very much indeed.
Steve Parker is the construction manager for this stretch of Crossrail's tunnels.
Boy, this is just, it's so enormous. I had no idea the one machine could be so big. It's incredible.
And there, right in front of me, is the back of the cutter head itself.
I mean, think about what it's doing. It's carving out soil that probably hasn't seen the light of day since the Earth was created.
The cutter head scythes its way through the clay. Behind it, tunnel engineers build a ring made up of 8 concrete segments slotted into place to within a millimeter's precision. When that's done, the machine braces itself against the ring it's just built and pushes forward to start the process again.
It's amazingly fast, isn't it? How fast you're moving. What, 100 meters? 100 meters a week?
I'd like to think that we could double that, because we're looking at the long average. The long average would be 100 meters a week. So to get the high output, we need certain months, weeks, with a higher output than that.
But what's amazing is we're seeing that here. When it's all up and running, there'll be another one next door being done at the same speed. And then there are going to be other ones dotted around building other pieces of Crossrail simultaneously.
Yes, there's another on Crossrail. There is 8 machines in total.
But this isn't just engineering for engineering's sake. Phyllis is on a much bigger mission.
There's news today about the new Victoria Walthamstow Underground. Tunnelling has begun at a number of places. The line will take 5 years to complete.
When people tunnelled under London in the past, they did it for a reason: to enable the city to keep growing.
London must have people moving about in it freely. A movement which is as vital to its life as the circulation of the blood is vital to the human body.
Today, the city's growing faster than ever. The population is expected to rise by nearly 2 million in the next 20 years. That is the real driving force behind Crossrail. So while London works and sleeps and parties, the new stations are taking shape. And Phyllis and Ada are on a mission to ensure the capital can continue to grow.
I confess, I love these big engineering projects. I've even stolen a ball of clay as a souvenir. I'll make a little ashtray out of it. We used to be world leaders at this, and we can clearly still do it when we put our minds to it. And here's my thought. Should we be doing a lot more of this kind of work? Now, I know I'm biased because I like it, but isn't there a case for investing 2 or 3 times as much in infrastructure? Simply to get Britain ready for the future.
You see, infrastructure's all around us. It's the roads we drive on, the lines we commute on, and the energy that powers us. It's what makes Britain tick. And it's the flavour of the month right now. All our main political parties say we need more of it. But why? Well, our problem right now is that our infrastructure hasn't kept up with the changes that have been occurring around us. In fact, some of it is wearing out.
My goodness. What a view. Little Diddy train going over the Forth Rail Bridge.
Here on the Firth of Forth, just north of Edinburgh, it's not the iconic Victorian rail bridge that's the problem, but the 20th century road bridge. And its story is a neat little tale about how our infrastructure was once world class, but hasn't kept pace with a changing world. Back in the post-war years, there was no road bridge here.
Instead, there was a ferry, a slow and cumbersome substitute in an age of speed.
When will you be near me, darling, won't you make it soon?
But that was a problem for the Scottish economy. The crossing was a vital link between Edinburgh and the north of Scotland, and plenty of time was wasted waiting for the boat to come in.
Every star above.
though some found a way to while away the hours.
The queues of cars, longer each year, were a visible argument of the need for a new bridge, a road bridge.
Have you heard about that swinging road, the suspension bridge across the river ford?
So, in the late 50s, construction started on a new road bridge.
That bridge that links us to the north, oh, that wonderful
In a rather different era for health and safety.
Oh yeah, that wonderful bridge that links us to the north.
At the time, it was the biggest outside America, a symbol of Britain's skill at civil engineering.
The north.
But here's the problem. The bridge was built with capacity for 12 million vehicles a year. It seemed like a wild overestimate back in the 1950s, but it hit that number 25 years ago. Today, the bridge carries more than 24 million vehicles a year, and it's showing the strain. The constant maintenance work is once again causing delays.
So what are the kinds of problems that you're finding on this bridge now?
It's corrosion in the main cable is an issue for us, but the deck itself has suffered with the heavy goods vehicles that have been passing over it every year, and we need to replace joints and components of the deck, which unfortunately means carriageway closures. And it's seen as such a critical piece of infrastructure. It's probably worth about £2 billion to the Scottish economy each year. So if this is out of action, then the Scottish economy is severely hit.
The Scottish government's decided it can't keep patching and mending the old bridge, and so it's starting anew. Soon there'll be 3 bridges here: 19th century, 20th century, and 21st. The great news is that British bridge building's moved on since the 1950s, and the new crossing will be a cable-stayed design, where the load is spread across multiple cables rather than the 2 on the old suspension bridge.
The advantages of a cable-stayed bridge is it's stiffer. It's also easier to maintain because each of the individual cables that make the structure can be taken out and replaced while the bridge operates. I mean, when you imagine it's 3 kilometres from bank to bank, and the structure is this ribbon of 5 metres depth from one end to the other, of continuous geometry, absolutely beautiful.
In the last few months, the vast caissons have arrived, the big cylinders which they'll sink into the Forth to enable construction of the towers for the new bridge. They're the first pieces of Scotland's biggest infrastructure project for a generation. But there's another thing going for it too. Although it'll cost £1.5 billion, it's a useful fillip to the local economy at a difficult time.
From the Rocky Canyon where the Columbia River rolls.
Ever since America built vast projects like this, the Grand Coulee Dam, during the Great Depression of the 1930s, infrastructure's been seen as one of the most effective ways of creating jobs.
Just about the biggest thing that man has ever done.
Many believe that the historical lesson applies today, and Britain should be digging her way out of a slump. There's a big argument over that.
Makes the Tower of Babel.
Whether we should build things to boost the economy. In any event, these projects aren't a quick fix. It's taken 5 years to get the new Forth Bridge to where it is today, directly employing 1,200 people.
Now, I wouldn't be one to argue that we should go around building bridges and tunnels simply to create jobs for construction workers. But if you know you've got to build one anyway, doing so at a time when there are unemployed construction workers and when the economy is in the doldrums, well, that makes an awful lot of sense.
The simple fact is, there's an awful lot more than bridge building to do, given the changes unfolding around us. Our population is growing fast. We're set to hit 70 million by 2030. In the late 1970s, 1 in 4 of us worked in manufacturing. Today, it's fewer than 1 in 10. Climate change is threatening the infrastructure we already have, and large chunks of our power network are reaching the end of the line. Yes, our fusty old country is in fact fast changing, and our infrastructure has to keep up. All our main political parties agree we need more infrastructure, and that we should pay for it through a mix of both public and private money. But how much is that going to cost? I've come to Oxford to see the economist Professor Dieter Helm, one of Britain's best infrastructure brains, for a frank assessment of how much we need to do.
We've changed, and you can't simply expect Britain to roll forward 20, 30 years, add another 10 million people and say, well, you can make do with the roads we've got today and the airports we've got today and all the rest of that infrastructure.
Right, if you wanted to put a figure on how much we should spend on infrastructure, what's the scale of it?
I totted up the total costs of the commitments in government programmes for investment, or government-driven programmes for investment, in water, energy, telecoms and transport. So no houses, no schools, none of those things. And I just added up the numbers, and they came to a staggering 500 billion, i.e. $500 billion by 2020. Now, you have to let that number sink in, and it doesn't matter if it's wrong by 100 billion in either direction. It's still an enormous number, and it gives you a measure of the gap between the aspiration and the sad reality of the position we find ourselves in.
What happens if we don't do anything? What happens if we just carry on as we are, don't take any big decisions?
If we just stick our heads in the sand and do nothing, then it isn't going to be a pretty sight going forward, and the British economy is not going to be in a fit state to take on all those other countries which are confronting these problems. And it's a process of gradual, insipid decline. That's the consequence of not facing up to the issues.
You can see why a Chancellor wouldn't necessarily want to borrow heavily from the frazzled debt markets right now. But infrastructure's not all government spending. It can be public or private. What is true is that in the end it's us who have to foot the bill, either as consumers or taxpayers.
£500 billion sounds scary, but think about it. Over 10 years, it's just a bit more than 3% of our economy. And spend it well, and it'll make your economy bigger than it would have been anyway. No, my point is, don't we need to spend more to give our economy space to respond to change, to give it room to dodge whatever punches are thrown at it, to keep it flexible? Above all, I should say, to allow it to respond to the changes that have always occurred and will occur, to the nature of the economy itself.
Here's the really tricky bit about infrastructure. None of us know what direction our economy will take in the next few decades, but we still have to prepare for it now. So we're bound to get a lot wrong, just as they did in the past. This is Kielder Water in Northumberland, the biggest man-made reservoir in Northern Europe. It's a beautiful part of the landscape of northeast England, but it is just 30 years old this year. Back in the 1960s, there was no reservoir here, just a picturesque valley.
The North Tyne Valley. Not pretty exactly, but abrasively beautiful in that unself-conscious northern way.
But demand for water was rising, and there soon wouldn't be enough to feed the furnaces of the Northeast's factories. So they found the best site for rain catchment, moved out the people, and in the mid-70s, the diggers moved in.
The lake, 7 miles long and 4 miles wide, will be bigger than Ullswater.
By 1982, it was ready for its grand opening.
So, 20 years of planning, 7 years of construction, and the reservoir was ready to meet the water needs of the heavy industry of the northeast. Just one hitch. By the time of the recession of the 1980s, there was much less of that industry than anyone had expected. All of a sudden, this beautiful place was a white elephant. The world outside had changed even more quickly than the valley.
Kielder is a monument to the way the British economy has evolved in recent times. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have built it. You'll always get forecasts wrong. That's in the nature of infrastructure. Think of it as an insurance policy which didn't get used. Heidi Mottram is the chief executive of Kielder's owner, Northumbrian Water.
My sort of feeling about that is, this is a long-term game, water resource planning. It's only 30 years. That's a blink of an eyelid, really, in terms of, I think, how populations grow and develop. So, yes, undoubtedly, that heavy industry did wane. But, there may come a time when things change around, population changes around, as we think about the way we want to use our country differently. So I think you have to think of these things in terms of sort of hundreds of years, not necessarily 30 years.
There is one other idea, isn't there, which is instead of moving the water down south, you could move the people up north.
Well, that's one where I do think that we should seriously give that some thought. This is not only a very beautiful part of the country in which to live with a fantastic quality of life, but it can welcome, the industries that need this resource. It can welcome additional population growth, and that's got to be, I think, a sensible, sustainable thing to do, hasn't it, to, use the assets that you've got in the best possible way.
The lesson of Kielder is that the world sometimes changes faster than infrastructure can. But that doesn't mean we should do nothing. Instead, we should appreciate that infrastructure needs to give us options, room for manoeuvre in the future.
A really interesting question to ask is, what kind of economy do you think we're going to have in 20 or 30 or 40 years' time? Are we really going to be able to survive on a service-based economy? Is the future just a bigger and bigger Canary Wharf? Is it just more and more large accountancy firms in the middle of London? Because if that's the future, then you should stick the infrastructure in the south, and you should provide stonking good airport facilities, broadband, urban transport systems, etc., for all those city slickers that we're going to have in the future. If, on the other hand, you think that model has had its time, just like our old manufacturing had its time in the 60s and 70s, and we're going to move a bit back towards manufacturing, then you have to ask, well, what sort of infrastructure would that need? And here's the chicken and egg question. If you don't provide the sort of infrastructure that a manufacturing economy might need, you won't get one. And then if it would be self-fulfilling, you'll end up with a service-based London economy.
So infrastructure isn't easy. Which sort of Britain do we build it for? And crucially, where? Do we try and rebalance our lopsided economy by building afresh in the manufacturing heartlands of the Midlands and North? Or do we lay on more and more in the southeast, where the population and the service sector have been growing fastest? Or are we content to do neither and have no options at all? No example sums up the difficult choices and our endless capacity to dither over them better than Heathrow. As we've moved away from manufacturing and towards services, it's played an ever bigger part in our economy. But we face an awkward question. Do we invest in more airport capacity in London or not? Before I tackle that, I'm going to get some hands-on experience of just how finely honed an operation a crowded airport like this has to be.
Right, I've got my 2 high-vis table tennis rackets, ear protection, a 747 coming my way, and butterflies in my stomach.
I've been entrusted with marshalling this 747 to the stand. That's 400 tons and around 350 passengers out of the 190,000 who arrive and depart here every day. No pressure then. You might not know it to look at me, but I've actually had a couple of hours training, and my tutor Simon is watching carefully on. It's a stressful old business, but I did manage to get it bang on the centre line, if maybe half a metre off its mark.
Well, the pilot gave me a really bad thumbs down there. He really did. He looked a bit annoyed. I think it's probably because we stopped quite suddenly. Simon.
Eben.
How did I do?
How did you do? Well, for a novice marshaller, that was excellent. 400 tons in your fingertips, and you got it bang on the mark there. Excellent, very well done. It's very, very important to make sure that this aircraft parks on the correct stopping position.
Because if he doesn't, they can't get the
passengers off, exactly. And Heathrow's operating at 99.2% capacity. As soon as an aircraft pushes back off of a stand, another one arrives onto a stand, there are people waiting to turn that aircraft around as quickly and as safely as possible.
And occasionally, planes are queuing up waiting for their parking space, really, aren't they?
Correct, but provided that we have a blue sunny day today, then everything should be working like clockwork, but thankfully a good day today, and very well done. That was really very, very good.
Marshalling day is over.
Most planes are now guided automatically to their stands, though some are still marshalled by the experts. The airport has seen phenomenal change in its 65-year history, and it's reacted to it in a very British way. Because whereas other countries have master-planned their big airports, Heathrow is a classic case of build as you go.
Civil flying gets going again, and Britain begins the fight for her old place on the skylines of the world.
It was built as an RAF base and handed over to civilian use in 1946. That year, it handled 63,000 passengers from tents alongside the runway.
Here a major air junction is being operated, while the buildings and runways are still growing up around it.
By 1951, it was shifting 800,000 passengers a year and rising. It's managed to keep raising the number of passengers year on year because planes have got bigger and by gradually building bigger terminals.
The architecture and interior decoration in this building provide an atmosphere in keeping with its importance as one of the greatest centres of international air traffic in the world.
Today, it's still building, and it handles 69 million passengers a year, of no more runways than it had in 1946. That means the people who make this place tick have been forced to become ever more ingenious to get the most out of what they've got.
The airport seems to build piece by piece. They've never quite finished it, and there's always something else going on. How does that affect what you guys do?
Well, that adds to the challenge and the complexity every day because it's like a big fluid jigsaw. All the planes keep coming and we have to find a space for them, but the picture keeps changing. Bits of taxiway are taken away from us, so we have to work around that. Stands are closed, etc., etc.
Give me some of the tricks of the trade that you guys use when you're trying to get the maximum use of the runways.
It's not a first-come, first-served basis. we get the aircraft and we shuffle them around at the runway to maximise the runway use.
Here's what Dave and his fellow controllers have to do. If they put big planes in front of small planes, they have to leave bigger gaps to account for the vortex the big planes leave in their wake. So instead, they try to bunch planes of similar sizes together to reduce the gaps.
So when I am in a plane circling around somewhere over the southeast of England, that's because you're shuffling my plane into the right kind of queue to get the most out of the runway.
That's correct. And I don't apologise for that. It's all about maximum runway usage.
Heathrow often gets a bad press, but really you can only marvel at the resourcefulness of the people who make it work within all the constraints. And in a way, it's a good example of a British approach to infrastructure. You underprovide it and you use ingenuity to get by. We're world champions at muddling through. As I say, you can marvel at it and then remember, muddling through can only get you so far.
We're at a crunch point because Heathrow's full. Other airports have space, but Heathrow is special. It's one of the world's hub airports. That means passengers don't just fly here to get to London, they fly here to catch planes onto somewhere else. Now, Britain's aviation bosses argue that's good for us all, as it allows them to lay on routes which otherwise wouldn't be viable. Routes to parts of the world which might be crucial to the future of the British economy.
We're not very well connected to growth economies. I've stopped using emerging economies because, China is the second biggest economy in the world. Brazil has overtaken the UK, so you can't really call these emerging. They've emerged, but they're growing at a significant pace. And if we're serious about playing a leading role in the global economy, you're going to have to connect to these destinations. And that's really going to be a challenge for Heathrow and for the UK.
Good evening. In the coming age of jumbo jets and supersonic speed, how and where will we make room for new airports in England's green and pleasant land?
You see, this question's nothing new. The problem of how to maintain airport capacity in the southeast has bedeviled successive governments for decades.
London faces erosion of its position as the hub of international air transport.
And now the issue is back. Do we build an extra runway at Heathrow, as Willie Walsh wants, or a brand new airport in the Thames? All options are being looked at by a government review. None is easy. Now, if you build a third runway at Heathrow, is that going to do it? Or are you going to be saying, in 30 years' time, we need a fourth runway or a fifth runway, at which point we might say, why didn't we build an airport somewhere else where we could do all of that in the first place?
I think that is the question that needs to be answered. My own view is that a third runway isn't the long-term solution. I think a third runway gives you 25 years. It keeps you in the game. So, you're quite right. I think it would be wrong for me to try and convince people that if you build a third runway at Heathrow, that's it, and we're now future-proofed. With the projected growth in air travel, I don't think it would do enough. But at least it gives you time to consider options.
But notice, almost all of those options are in the south of England, which means that airport capacity is a classic example of a very British infrastructure dilemma.
Here's the problem. Britain needs more infrastructure, but the very places that it needs it most are the places that are most crowded, have most people. And yet it's the place where the crowds are that there isn't room to build anything, where you meet most objections. Yet when it comes to a decision over airports, where and whether you build another hub, well, this touches on issues around where we expect people to live, what kind of economy we want to have. These are issues way above the pay grade of people involved in aviation. These are questions of grand national strategy. Difficult questions, mind you, but they really can't be ducked.
North, south, east, west, hub airports or alternative investments. There's a huge menu of infrastructure opportunities in Britain. You can argue about them all, but just because decisions are difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't face up to them. And there's an additional economic reason for looking at how much we invest in our future. To understand it, an example from our past.
It's pretty obvious that we have the power to change our infrastructure. What's more interesting is that infrastructure has the power to change us, to be transformative, to alter our behaviour, our way of thinking, often in very unexpected ways.
This rather beautiful locomotive is Planet, a replica of the very first one to run down these tracks in 1830 as part of the Liverpool and Manchester Railway, Britain's first intercity line.
Warm up here.
Today, it's part of Manchester's Museum of Science and Industry. But back then, it was 30 miles of track, which changed Britain forever.
This was built in '92, but it's pretty well the same as the one that was built in 1830.
Visually it is, but it's made with modern materials, and we've got modern safety features, like brakes.
Did they really not have brakes originally?
They were more interested in making it go.
The original motivation for the Liverpool and Manchester Railway had been to carry freight. Local businessmen had wanted to link the two cities. But guess what? Once the line had been built, it actually turned out that people wanted to travel as well. And pretty soon, passengers were the dominant traffic. What had happened was the line had transformed the geography of the region in a way that no one had anticipated. This railway, it took the brakes off the development of the economy of the region.
Yes, here in Manchester, well, of course, not only were the needs of the existing cotton mills satisfied, but a lot of other people said, right, now we got the opportunity of setting up further cotton mills, and the textile industry expanded very quickly. And as soon as the railway opened and made it so much easier to get the cotton imports, the food imports, and all the other 101 other things that were required here in Manchester, then of course the numbers of ships coming through the port of Liverpool instantly doubled. You know, it was a huge increase. That made an enormous difference to the port of Liverpool.
You buy a railway and you get a flourishing port for free. The Liverpool-Manchester Railway showed how infrastructures had a transformative effect on Britain's economy in the past. When you bring people together, you create new economic opportunities that you couldn't have anticipated. There are huge benefits to shrinking distances between people. It made our economy more productive back then, and there's evidence it can do that now. And there are plenty of ways to do it. Go further and faster in linking the cities of the north of England, for example. Or go further and faster in creating space for London to grow.
We can use infrastructure to bring people closer together. But the question is, where should we focus our investment? If we spend all our money around London, as it sometimes feels we are doing, well, then you drive people to London. It becomes self-fulfilling. That's not a very good idea. If you don't spend money in London, you invest it all around Manchester, for example, well, then you're in danger of choking the economy in London, which is a fast-growing part of the country. So that's not a good idea. Isn't there a case for doing both, for investing everywhere? Maybe we just have to give our country some options.
This government and the last have recognised these arguments. And this is their big hope for bringing us closer together. It's Curzon Street in Birmingham, built by Robert Stephenson in the 1830s as the magnificent terminus for the London-Birmingham railway line. Today, it's rather faded, But there is a plan. It's the proposed site for the new Birmingham station for High Speed 2. The new fast rail line from London to Birmingham, and in time beyond that to the north. The government hopes it can shift the nation's centre of economic gravity. Doug Oakervee is a wily infrastructure veteran and the Brit who oversaw the building of Hong Kong's new airport in the middle of the South China Sea in the 1990s. Today, he's got an even bigger job on his hands, making High Speed 2 become a reality.
Right, Doug, looks like a bit of a wasteland at the moment. Some might call it a nature reserve or a park, but what is this going to be if you get your way?
Well, this is going to be the real hub of High Speed 2. This is Birmingham Station, with the platforms going off in that direction. And the old Curzon Street station that was built in 1838 will be brought back in to the new station and refurbished completely. So bringing the original history of Birmingham's railway from 1838 up to the modern day.
Infrastructure has the power to change the geography of the nation. We're talking about shrinking the distance between Birmingham and London. What does that do? Does that accentuate the concentration of activity in London, which already has a lot of activity in it, or does it disperse activity out of London?
I think it'll probably do both things. I mean, it'll make life very much easier for those who want to commute to London. But I think the key thing is with HS2, when it develops itself and establishes it here, and the development that takes place around it will encourage many more companies to Birmingham, which in the sense is a better location for a lot of industries, and there will be greater connectivities between the north and the south. I mean, some might like to say it'll bridge the north-south divide.
High Speed 2 might bridge the north-south divide, or it might suck yet more economic activity down south. As we saw with the Liverpool-Manchester Railway, infrastructure often has unexpected effects which nobody bargained for. So until we've built it, no one really knows.
Like so much infrastructure, it's really hard to know what the effect of HS2 would be. You can do your detailed passenger projections, but frankly, you're likely to be way off the mark with them. No, with transformative infrastructure, it bears on much, much bigger issues. HS2 isn't really about journey times, it's about the whole shape of our nation. Are we a country called Britain with a capital called London, or are we a country called London with a huge great suburb called Britain? That is the really difficult question facing us.
The case for investing more in infrastructure is to make this difficult question easier, to build space for the economy to grow in all parts of the country. But wait, there's a case against too, not just the financial cost, but the effect development has on our quality of life and environment. It's a case that has to be answered. This is the practice of Norman Foster, a British architect with a global reputation. He's designed infrastructure around the world, including airports in Hong Kong and Beijing, and he has his own vision for how Britain could and should invest more. I've come to see how he answers the critics, those who think more infrastructure means concreting over Britain.
We probably have the greatest heritage in the world in terms of inspirational individuals. You look at Brunel. He created tunnels, bridges, ports, ships. I mean, the breadth of that ambition, we should be creating in that spirit for present generations as they grow older, future generations unborn.
Do you recognise that there are a lot of things we want to leave younger, future generations? We want to leave them a country that is intact, that is beautiful, and that where nature has been preserved. And for every Brunel fan out there saying Brunel is the sort of Great Britain who it represents the best of our nation. And there are lots of others. And there's another one saying it's the countryside that represents the greatest asset we have. It's that. And I wonder whether at least you recognise that there's this, perhaps a bit of a conflict.
There's always a conflict. It's always a balance. Of course, at the same time, we can preserve the countryside. We can integrate infrastructure in the countryside in another great tradition, the landscaping tradition of a century earlier, before the Industrial Revolution. What happened to that landscaping tradition? Why is that seen as something separate from infrastructure?
Now there's a thought. In recent years, the story of British infrastructure has been a string of costly battles between developers and protesters, with both sides digging in. But does it have to be a battle? Is it possible to build for the future while preserving our natural heritage? This is the Devil's Punch Bowl in Surrey, a beauty spot with a past. Dame Fiona Reynolds heads the National Trust, which owns the land.
So Fiona, I used to drive down this section of the A3. It is just an unbelievable and spectacular change. It's just incredible.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I did too, or, you know, stop sometimes in the queues. But I think what's amazing about this is how quickly nature's reclaiming it.
And this is what it used to look like. For decades, the A3 snaked along this valley, a scar on a stunning natural amphitheatre. But the road needed expanding, and rather than take the cheap option, a flyover, they chose to exploit the great British talent for tunnelling.
I mean, it was phenomenally expensive, actually.
Yeah, it was. It was about £370 million, which is an enormous amount of money, but the benefit is absolutely huge. And the alternatives were horrific. I mean, there would have been a kind of huge kind of flyover across the Devil's Punch Bowl, one of the most important landscapes in southern England.
OK, so we know you like infrastructure, expensive as it can be, that improves the countryside. What about your view of the stuff that doesn't improve the countryside, but maybe gives us jobs, development, homes, roads, transport, all those things, other things that we want in our lives?
We always, as a society, have aspirations for the future. We have aspirations to get places faster, we have aspirations for the economy, we have aspirations for jobs, but we also have aspirations for quality of life. And I think what's happened over the years, and I've seen this in practice over many years of being involved in the environmental movement, is infrastructure projects are led by economic benefit, and then it's almost the environmentalists have to kind of campaign against. And what we've been trying to do over the years is to say infrastructure projects can deliver more benefits than the single economic driver that started them off. And if you can find ways of meeting all those objectives, environmental, social, as well as economic, then actually you get a product that is better from all perspectives and is the right thing to do for the long term.
When it comes to infrastructure in this country, we've often been paralysed by a dilemma between countryside, environment, quality of life and development. But if you are willing to spend a bit of cash, you can actually make your infrastructure quite countryside friendly. Not all of it, you're never going to make an airport, very sympathetic, but a lot of infrastructure can be made so. So here's a thought. Do we have to make a choice between environment and development? Maybe we can have both. Rather than being paralysed by the dilemma, maybe we should see it as a spur to action. We should just get on with doing more, not less.
Now, if you're one of the many people who feel uneasy at the prospect of building more and think I'm in danger of overstating the case, I have a final thought, one very close to home.
This is Ashford. The train now standing at platform 2 is the 1191 Southwest Way.
The old hometown looks the same as I step down from the train. And there's that old oak tree that I
This is Ashtead in Surrey, where I grew up. Quintessential leafy southeast England.
Arms reaching, smiling sweetly. It's good to touch the green, green grass of home.
Today, I'm coming back for the annual Village Day, a festival of candy floss, dog shows, and good old-fashioned entertainment.
There we go. What do I have to do? The red dot. I've got to land it on the red dot. But that's impossible. Okay, I've just got a little bit weighed up. Got to push it more to the right. I've got to push it quite a bit harder. Thank you very much. Not close enough. Great stuff. I'm afraid my hand's a bit wet, actually. Oh, sorry.
It's just like old times, and that is rather the point in a way.
Never win. So this is where I was brought up. This was the local recreation ground, the Rec. Spent many happy hours here. But for many of my childhood years, Ashtead lived in fear. It had a nightmare vision, and that nightmare was called the M25. Hadn't been built then, of course, but it was set to come very close to here. Now, pretty well everybody I knew thought whatever motorways the South East needed, they didn't want one close to Ashtead.
When the M25 orbital motorway around London is completed, it will be 118 miles long, and a journey that now takes 6 hours will be cut to 2.
When the route of the M25 had been announced, it brought uproar right around the southeast.
The ceremonial opening of a motorway inquiry.
And the good people of Ashtead and Leatherhead rallied to the cause.
The Transport Minister will have to decide whether or not the M25 Leatherhead interchange goes ahead.
We were fired up by what was going to happen to our environment here. When they changed the route of the motorway from several miles out to bring it in between Ashtead and Leatherhead, it really got our dander up because they were going to impact on so much we hold dear.
John Earl was one of Ashtead's original protesters, a pillar of the community who became an unlikely rabble-rouser.
We got emotional about what was happening to us. Like British bulldogs, we were going to shake this one until it stopped.
What was the most outrageous thing you did?
I suppose disrupting the inquiry at Bookham with foghorns, those compressed air things that make a lot of noise, and nasty smells, and generally...
Smells as well as noise?
Smells as well, yes.
Stink bombs?
Yes. Being a chemical engineer, you know about these things, so, yes. Looking back on that, am I ashamed? Not really, no. When you get excited about what you're trying to do, you'll do anything to stop and make people listen.
But John lost his rather admirable battle. Ashtead got a brand new Junction 9, and the South East got its orbital motorway.
Now, some people are saying that the road is a disaster. I must say I can't stand those who carp and criticise when they ought to be congratulating Britain on a magnificent achievement and beating the drum for Britain all over the world.
Here's the thing that strikes me whenever I'm back. Things are just the same. The M25 is far from perfect, but the world didn't stop turning, and Ashtead wasn't ruined. That's my personal feeling, but what about theirs?
So I want to ask you a question, so listen carefully. If I could click my fingers and at a stroke remove the M25, so obviously you wouldn't have the noise, and obviously you wouldn't have the motorway to get around. Can I just see, how many of you would like me to click my fingers and remove the M25? How many of you would like to keep the M25? Very interesting. Well, those votes will be taken into account. Would you click your fingers and hope it went away?
I think, to give you an honest opinion, it's got to stay where it is. I wouldn't click it away because the amount of traffic has increased so much. I mean, the roads around here, when the motorway's got a problem at these local junctions, it's gridlock around Ashton, Epsom, Leatherhead. In a twinkle of an eye. You know when something happened on the motorway because all the streets fill up. People are piling off the motorway.
Even the local band are called Junction 9 in honour of the motorway. And I think there's something encouraging here, because what a trip to Ashtead reminds me is that while humans often instinctively resist change, when that change eventually comes, we rise to the challenge.
So with infrastructure, you find a community adapts itself to the infrastructure around it. They don't want anything new, but give them something new and they'll adapt to that and then be perfectly content. And it seems that's what's happened here.
Back at Crossrail, Phyllis is still burrowing her way under Paddington, and that London clay is being shipped out by rail to make a new nature reserve on the Essex coastline. This place is proof that Britain can pull off the re-engineering we need, and we've seen that we do need it. To replace the fraying fabric of the country, to give the economy options for growth, to make people more productive, to enhance the environment. But at £15 billion, Crossrail doesn't come cheap, and nor does the shopping list for Britain's infrastructure needs. Yet if we want to future-proof Britain in a fast-changing world, we might just have to bite the bullet.
You may believe we should invest a lot more in infrastructure, but have one last nagging doubt, that we will somehow screw it all up, end up wasting money. So many of these big construction projects go wrong, don't they? Well, I've some good news. We appear to be getting the hang of them. And next time I'll show you why we have no reason to be scared of big projects and every reason to allow ourselves to be a lot more ambitious.
From the infrastructure that made the Olympics work to the engineering marvels of High-Speed 1. How we're learning from some spectacular mistakes to become a can-do nation once again.
What benefit has the last 150 years of infrastructure development in Britain brought to the country? You can find out with the Open University's timeline. Just go to our website and follow the links to the Open University.
Another chapter in the story of Wales here on BBC HD at 7 o'clock on Tuesday. But next tonight, though, Evan's back in just a moment as Guardian of the Dragon's Den.